Welcome back to the Conduct Detrimental Podcast. We have a breaking podcast today with breaking news out of the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, which was supposed to decide today whether or not they would accept the New Jersey sports betting case, invited the U.S. Solicitor General to file a brief on the issue instead of denying or accepting the case. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Wallach. Dan, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm actually in Washington, D.C. today, so it's kind of apropos for the ruling. I think this is, in many ways, it's surprising because, we were expecting either a cert grant or a cert denial, but I hearken back to the government's failure to file a brief with the Supreme Court. I don't believe that the Supreme Court would have ever granted certiorari without hearing from the federal government. So maybe today's development, in retrospect, shouldn't have been too surprising because the only litigants that filed briefs with the U.S. Supreme Court were the two New Jersey parties, the New Jersey Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, and then Governor Christie and several of the other state officials. And then, of course, the sports leagues filed an answer brief. But any challenge to the constitutionality of a federal law, federal legislation, one would expect that the court would want to hear from the U.S. Solicitor General, and that's in fact what happened today. So in retrospect, probably not too surprising, but very few of us saw this coming, except for Christopher Soriano. He's a gaming lawyer in New Jersey who did hint at this possibility, and this now keeps the issue alive for 4 or 5 months and adds like triple, quadruple layers of intrigue to the story.
Yeah, it was an interesting development that I didn't see coming. It's shocking that someone did because it's a pretty rare move on their part. Not very rare, but you don't see it too frequently. I'm admitted to the Supreme Court, as I believe you are as well, but I'm not a frequent practitioner in the court, so I didn't really know all the details of this going in, but I did a little digging. It's a really interesting move, and I think a lot is going to depend on really what the Solicitor General comes back with. And I think maybe even the most fascinating point of this is that we don't know what Solicitor General is going to be the one responding, since we're likely to get one with the new administration, so we don't know who it is. We don't really know what Trump's views are on sports betting and how he may try to influence that decision as well. Because, I did, again, as I mentioned, I did a little digging on this type of request, and people that have done the research have looked at the past cases. Almost universally, the Supreme Court, who rarely asks for help from anyone else, mind you, will go with the Solicitor General's recommendation. It's actually called the 10th Justice when they do this, and maybe in this case the 9th Justice, since there's only 8 sitting justices on the Supreme Court right now. Dan, what do you see as far as the new administration coming in? How will that impact what we may hear back from the Solicitor General?
Well, the 10th Justice is certainly a lot more meaningful than the 16th New York Nick, but there is still a U.S. Solicitor General in office, an interim acting U.S. Solicitor General who remains the SG until a new one comes in, and Donald Trump hasn't yet taken office, and the rumors are that he is considering 2 names that have come out. I think Charles Cooper, who I'm not overly familiar with, and then another gentleman, George Conway, who's a lawyer at Wachtell Lipton, and fascinating is the husband of Kellyanne Conway. So those are the 2 names being bandied about, but until President-elect Trump assumes office, and even after he assumes office, there may not be an appointment. Or I don't think it's a cabinet level appointment. I think that he just names a Solicitor General. I could be wrong on that, but we have an SG in the office right now, and theoretically, that Solicitor General can act and submit a brief, before Trump, names somebody else. I doubt that is going to happen. I think I think this is a golden opportunity for President Trump to shape the future of sports betting if he wants to. I mean, all the speculation in the last few weeks has centered on how Trump could advance sports betting by pushing it through Congress. Well, he has 2 prime opportunities right now to almost guarantee that this issue get heard by the Supreme Court. He could nominate or name a Solicitor General, and he can fill the missing or the vacant ninth seat that had been occupied by Antonin Scalia. A ninth justice could be one of the four justices that votes in favor of having certiorari granted. So his justice appointment could impact the debate, but even more immediately, he could vet a Solicitor General candidate if he's truly dialed into this issue. He could vet it right now and discuss it with any prospective, SG nominee. So if Donald Trump has this unique power immediately and potentially decisively to impact whether the Supreme Court hears the sports betting case.
Has there been any indication in his past that you think he would be pro sports betting?
Yeah, he's owned several casinos. Back in the early 1990s, after PASPA was enacted, there was a one-year window under which New Jersey and New Jersey alone could have passed legislation legalizing sports betting within the state, and PASPA permitted that. But the one-year window slammed shut in 1993 when the state failed to act. But during that time frame, Donald Trump owned several casinos in New Jersey and was visible and vocal in support of New Jersey legalizing. So that was 25 years ago. Fast forward to 2015, he had an appearance on the Colin Cowherd show where he pointedly stated, this stuff is going on anyway, daily fantasy, sports betting, you might as well, he said something to the effect that you might as well have it be legal. So for the first time, we have an office holder, a presidential office holder, who has an opinion, both past and recent, on the subject of state-sanctioned sports betting, and he was for it then, and he appears to be for it now. The question is, given all of the surrounding issues that he's facing coming into office, is this going to get on his radar now? And if it does get on his radar, could he choose a justice or a solicitor general that will advance that agenda? And that's the great unknown here. But he alone pretty much has that power to tilt the scales in favor of sports betting right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I live in this world where we probably think this stuff's a little more important than everyone else does. So maybe, it's not on his, the first question he asks when vetting candidates or when looking into potential Supreme Court justices. But I certainly think it's one of those issues that could be economy game changer. It could impact a lot of aspects of his presidency. And so, whether or not it does become something that's important to him will be worth following. Dan, do you have an idea of what today's decision does to the ultimate timeline of the case? Do we know when Supreme Court's ultimately going to rule on whether they'll take the case or not?
The Supreme Court does not set forth any hard deadlines for the Solicitor General to act by. So this is not on a clock right now where the SG has to file something this week or this month even. But I would expect the Solicitor General, whoever that office holder may be, to file a placeholder, some kind of notification that we will file a brief by a certain time because of the transition of the presidential administrations. I'd be surprised if it just languished without any indication from the Solicitor General's office for the next few months. But this could play out. This could play out until March, April, or May. I wouldn't expect to see a brief anytime before the end of February. And I think the goal and the likelihood is that something will be filed during the 2016-17 Supreme Court term, and the court will be in a position to go thumbs up or thumbs down, at least on cert, before the term ends. And it's even possible that the court, if it does grant cert, could hear oral argument before the end of June. But this is the great unknown right now. We could be in a holding pattern for a few months, and the only winners will be sports legal commentators, and of course those people who go to sports and gaming conferences, because this is going to be one of the hottest or most controversial and talked about issues in the gaming and the sports legal scene. So the issue is going to remain at a hot boil. or at least at a low simmer for quite a while. But I got to think that the Solicitor General will file something, by March or April, and this issue will be ready for determination, at least on the cert stage, by May.
Yeah, I think that schedule makes sense. I'm less optimistic that we get the oral argument, assuming they take the case, well, this term. But
Dan, let's remember there's the Department of Justice, which filed briefs before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit during Christie 2. So you have lawyers who are already on the case that may have already been in a position to work up the SG's response, or who may have already written the SG's response for his signature. So it may be at varying states of completion, but I think all bets are off until the identity of the new Solicitor General is determined, and that could be weeks away.
Absolutely. What do you think this means to some of the other challenges that are out there, or threatened challenges that are out there to sports gambling?
Well, that's an interesting dynamic, because if other states move forward, like Mississippi and New York, that could actually undercut New Jersey's chances for Supreme Court review, because if the Supreme Court sees that there are lower federal court challenges emerging in the Second Circuit and potentially in the Fifth Circuit, well, maybe the court pulls back and says, let's wait for a circuit split to emerge. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is that what New York and Mississippi are doing or hope to do is going to be completely independent of what happens with New Jersey and what happens at the Supreme Court. But one measure that will definitely be impacted is this notion of a complete repeal, the nuclear option by the state of New Jersey, which is a bill that was proposed in the New Jersey Assembly, I think towards the latter part of October, early November, which proposed a complete decriminalization of sports betting in New Jersey, repealed any and all prohibitions and regulations governing sports betting, and would basically open up the state, on a statewide basis to a so-called Wild West or Wild East. I think that measure is going to remain on ice until we get finality from the Supreme Court.
What about federal legislation? I mean, does this kind of show that at least one branch of the government is considering this issue more strongly, and maybe they'll start pushing other branches of the government, perhaps the legislative branch, to start thinking about federal legislation on this issue, or repealing Pabst-Book?
Well, that's certainly a possibility, because the Solicitor General, within the scope of his powers, can reach out to other branches of government for their viewpoints before finalizing, before submitting an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is an opportunity, even without legislation. Congress could weigh in now via the Solicitor General's office and make its views known. And this is a window in which, at least indirectly, Congress might be able to impact the process. But the lobbying efforts are going to go forward regardless of what's happening at the Supreme Court. The American Gaming Association is going to actively lobby Congress throughout 2017. If anything, today's move, or today's measure, I think energizes everybody, because for the first time, not for the first time, but I think this is the most significant development in the 5-year history of the New Jersey sports betting case. We are one brief away from the Supreme Court granting cert. What if the Solicitor General recommends that certs be granted, and then maintains or asserts on the merits that PASPA has severe or significant constitutional infirmities? If the Solicitor General goes as far as that, or at least recommends that cert be granted, or asks the court to review the case, that could be a game changer.
Absolutely, and I think that's.
I overuse game changer. I use that in every interview, but this time I mean it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if history teaches us anything, how the Supreme Court looks at these briefs, and if the Solicitor General goes out of his way to say that the merits of this brief and kind of questions what PASPA is doing these days, I think that's very realistic that we could see this being overturned by the Supreme Court, because as I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court almost always follows the guidance of the Solicitor General on when they ask for his or her input. So that is.
Yeah. They've asked for his recommendation. If they didn't want his recommendation, they could have denied cert. So this ultimately comes down to whether the recommendation is made in favor of certiorari being granted, and secondly, how persuasive that recommendation is. But they wouldn't have asked him for it if they didn't want to hear his opinion, and I think the Solicitor General's recommendation will ultimately be determinative of whether cert is granted. So we literally are one brief away from a cert grant. And who would have believed this a week ago? A week ago, you're reading about these statistics and historical percentages of, less than 2% of Supreme Court petitions are granted. I think in light of today's development, given the importance of the issue nationally, framed against the backdrop of the emergence of fantasy sports and the inconsistency in the application of PASPA to state DFS laws, I mean, this has every box checked. I think the percentage likelihood of a cert grant really, rather than put a percentage on it, I would say the Solicitor General holds the cards. If the Solicitor General recommends cert, we're going to see New Jersey sports betting in Washington, D.C. later this spring.
Absolutely, and I think we probably should have led with this, but as you mentioned, this drastically increases the chances of a cert grant from, which is less than 1%. So anything is better than that, really.
Is it 2 or 1? I've seen conflicting numbers. I always think those numbers are skewed anyway, because the court receives all these prisoner petitions and unrepresented parties, and of course there's the Michelle McGurks of the world. Even Michelle McGurk filed a cert petition. So if you cut out all this like chafe and all the nonsensical petitions that get filed, and you look only at paid petitions that are filed by known Supreme Court advocates like an Olson or a Clement, I think the numbers are a lot higher than 2%.
True. But also, if you look at the grants and you look at which ones are not circuit splits, there are very few.
Yeah.
And this case is, doesn't fall in that category, so it was even more of an uphill battle. And it's been rejected before. I mean, all the signs pointed to it being rejected, and so as you mentioned, that's why today's news is really, really a big deal and a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of when the Third Circuit granted the rehearing because it had been lose, and then all of a sudden they had this sort of second chance at a win. It kind of feels that way again. Hopefully we'll get a little different result this time.
Yeah.
So
New Jersey is the ultimate bottom of the ninth inning team coming from behind. I mean, this is, but will they be the 2001 New York Yankees against the Arizona Diamondbacks, or will they be the 1986 Mets against the Boston Red Sox? Time will tell. But this is still in the surreal phase right now, because this changes the dynamic, considerably from hopeless to not only hopeful but very optimistic. And Donald Trump does have the kind of influence over this process now that he did not possess yesterday or the day before. The speculation on a Trump presidency was always with the longer view towards sports betting, not how he could put his thumb on the scales today. And Donald Trump could put his thumb on the scales today and make this or cause this to happen. Maybe we elevate the importance of legal sports betting on our own minds because we talk about it a lot, but it is a true economic engine for the casino industry, for state treasuries. Look at how much money is on the table in a legal sports betting environment. By conservative estimates, close to 200 billion or maybe 150 billion is wagered in the illegal market. If you could capture most of that in a regulated environment and create revenue streams for state governments to impact infrastructure, roads, highways, schools, services provided throughout the state, this should be one of this is one of the easiest economic stimulus packages that Donald Trump could support, because it's guaranteed to be a financial windfall for all stakeholders, not just casinos, not just the sports leagues, not just the TV networks, but for states and for people working in states. And if this somehow could be funneled through, brick and mortar casinos and racetracks, and maybe it doesn't have to go online or have an iGaming component to it. Maybe the way to sell it to a Congress, a Republican-controlled Congress that's averse to the rise of iGaming might be to sell it as a brick and mortar package and have it, at least initially, be a mechanism that can be routed through brick and mortar gaming venues such as casinos and racetracks.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, where this ultimately ends up. I think you and I are both of the opinion that it's just a matter of time before this is, sports gambling is legalized. But there's certainly a lot of different paths for us to get to that point. So, well, I don't want to keep you, Dan. I know that I know you have meetings in D.C. today, and we apologize for the some of the car noises back there. But Dan is on the road, and we wanted to make sure.
Unfortunately, one of them isn't my Uber driver, so that's the biggest reason to apologize. But no, this is a major plus for New Jersey because they faced a 2% chance of success, and now the complexion of the entire case changes, and now attention shifts to the all-important Solicitor General appointment, because until that person is identified, we're just guessing at even after he's identified, we're guessing at what he's going to do. But that now in the sports betting landscape, that becomes far more important than the identity of the ninth justice.
Great stuff. Thanks again, Dan. We just want to do a breaking quick one for y'all.
Yep. Dan, it was a pleasure as always. It seems that all the breaking stories center on New Jersey sports betting, and I have a feeling this won't be the last one.
True. Well, we'll have to expand this a little bit and do some more different topics as they come up. Hasn't been too much juicy recently, but I'm sure if history teaches us anything, we will get there. So
the year is young, my friend.
Yes,
we
sir.
will have, as great as last year was. I think there's a lot more on the horizon now. In so many different areas, as you captured in your preview of 2017. This is going to be a dynamic year. If a week goes by without any noteworthy development, it will be shocking. So,
absolutely.
Anyway, thanks for putting this together on short notice, and hopefully we've shed some light on what is a mysterious process going forward.
For sure. And as Dan mentioned, I just this morning released my 2017 sports law mega preview. I looked at, I think, 54 sports law cases that could hit major headlines in 2017. That's up on thewhitebronco.com, so check that out and yell at me in the comments for the cases that I missed, because I'm sure there are some, but I did my best. So thanks again, Dan. Have a great trip, and we'll talk to you soon.